I was never meant to be a runner. I forced myself into the routine out of pure stubbornness, determined to finish the Chicago Marathon if it killed me. 4 years ago, I was deep into training 60 miles a week, like clockwork. My ritual was the same every morning. Alarm at 4:45, shoes laced by 4:50, 2, out the door by 5 a.m. sharp. My route was a 10-mile loop skirting a dense state park, 4 miles along an old creek bed, 3 through the park's access road, 3 back past an industrial complex. I'd run it so many times that the path felt carved into my bones. I knew every dip, every crack in the concrete. It was muscle memory. That's why I noticed the first change immediately. One cold Tuesday morning, about a month before race day, I hit the point where the trail widens right where I usually settle into my pace. My headlamp swept the pavement, and something small and gray caught in its beam. A stone, but not just a stone, a perfectly smooth, river-worn rock the size of a golf ball, placed dead center on the white dividing line of the path. Too clean, too precise. I slowed to a stop, picked it up. It shouldn't have been there. There were no streams nearby, no gravel beds, definitely not rocks this polished. It wasn't dropped, it was placed. I tossed it into the brush and kept running, annoyed more than scared. But irritation turned into something darker exactly 1 week later. Same day, same time, same point on the trail. And another stone. Not the same stone, another identical one. Smooth, gray, golf ball sized, placed with the same eerie precision directly in my path. The first time was coincidence. The second time was intention. I pocketed it and finished the run, my mind spinning. Someone had put it there. Someone who knew runners would see it. Maybe someone who knew I would see it. I told my friend Alex later that night. He was a marathon veteran, calm, grounded, rational. "It's a park," he said. "Kids mess with stuff. Animals drag things around." "No," I insisted. "It was exactly the same rock, same size, same spot." "You're overthinking it, marathon brain. Chill." I tried. I really did. Until the next morning. That day, I didn't find one stone. I found 3. The first was the 2-mile marker, the spot where my body locked into rhythm every single morning. The second was at mile 3.7, where I always, without fail, paused to sip water. The third was at mile 5, the exact spot where I paused to stretch my left hamstring. Identical stones, precise placements, each one at a point only someone studying my routine would know. My mouth went dry. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't chance. Someone was watching my runs, tracking my pace, marking the rhythm of my mornings with eerie accuracy. I was being measured. The darkness of the woods suddenly felt thicker. My headlamp felt like a spotlight painting me as prey. That morning, I changed the route. At mile 6, I veered off onto an access trail I'd never taken before, a narrow, rough path disappearing into dense woods. It added 2 miles and nearly twisted my ankle on roots. But I wanted to break my pattern, to see if the watcher could follow. When I finally emerged onto the main path, gasping and exhausted, the sky barely beginning to lighten, I thought maybe I'd shaken it. I checked the trail for a stone. Nothing. But at the trailhead sign, taped neatly at eye level, was a laminated 3x5 card, printed in a clean sans serif font. Good deviation. Your pace was 8:23 divided by mile on the side trail. Stick to the creek next time. It's faster. My blood went cold. That pace 8:23 was exact. Only I and the GPS on my wrist knew it. And someone else. I tore the card down, hands shaking violently. This wasn't just tracking. This was analysis. Critique. Someone was studying my performance like a coach observing an athlete. I didn't run the rest of the day. I didn't sleep either. My wife, Sarah, panicked when I showed her the note. "Call the police," she demanded. I hesitated, embarrassed. What was I going to say? A stone and a laminated card are stalking me? But we did call, and of course the officer treated it like a joke. Sounds like a prank. Change your route. Run with a buddy. A prank doesn't know your pace to the second. A prank doesn't laminate notes. A prank doesn't track your weak points. I took 3 days off. Figured if I stopped running, maybe the watcher would get bored. I was wrong. On Friday morning, I went to make coffee, and something outside the window stopped my heart. On our rarely used backyard picnic table sat one of my old running shoes, the pair I'd retired months earlier, the ones I kept in a sealed storage bin. They were muddy, damp, recently handled. I sprinted to the laundry room. The small window above the washing machine, the one I never opened, had a bent latch. Not broken, just bent, manipulated. Someone had reached inside. Wedged into the shoelace of the old running shoe was another laminated card. Old shoes, 412 miles. Time to replace them. You're at risk for a medial sesamoid fracture. I checked your Strava. You need a 1 hours 45 minutes half marathon this weekend. Do not disappoint. 412 miles. The exact number I logged before retiring that pair. Logged privately, deep inside my Strava account. Someone didn't just watch my runs, they had access to my data. Someone with knowledge, patience, obsession. A chill rippled through me, something deeper than fear. A sense that my life had been converted into numbers on someone else's spreadsheet. I wasn't being stalked. I was being studied. The next day, I signed up for a 4-hour access gym. 9th floor of a downtown building. Cameras, card swipes, bright lights. Safe. All week I ran on treadmills. No stones, no notes. Until Sunday. After a brutal 20-mile treadmill run, I wiped the console with a towel and found a small handwritten note taped perfectly underneath. Elegant handwriting. Calm. Precise. You are off pace by 3.4 seconds on the 10th mile. Heart rate peaked early. Your form is better when you think you're alone. Try running outside. The air quality in here is subpar. My heart nearly stopped. They knew my treadmill splits. My heart rate. My form. Then the last line. The view is great from the 9th floor. I turned slowly toward the giant window overlooking the city. 9 stories down. Nothing moved. But in the reflection behind me, for a split second, I saw something tall shift in the shadows behind the unused machines. I spun around. The room was empty, but I knew without question, I wasn't alone. I ran out of that 9th floor gym like something was chasing me, even though the hallways were empty. My imagination was fighting logic, and logic was losing. Someone had been close enough to watch my form, read the numbers on the treadmill, and understand every detail of my performance. The note's last line replayed in my head on a loop. The view is great from the 9th floor. That meant a window across from the gym, a rooftop, a parking structure, somewhere with a clear line of sight. Or worse, someone had been inside the gym with me, hidden just out of view. I didn't go back, ever. 2 weeks remained before the Chicago Marathon. That race had once been my goal, the finish line I dreamed about. Now it felt like a deadline someone else had set for me. And I had a sickening feeling that if I didn't show up, they'd come find me. Race day arrived cold, windy, and metallic with the smell of thousands of bodies and nerves. Sarah stayed home. She couldn't stand the idea of me running while this person was watching. But I didn't have a choice. At the starting corral, surrounded by runners, I should have felt anonymous, safe. But I didn't. Whenever I felt someone's stare linger too long, or a camera turn in my direction, my skin crawled. The crowd didn't protect me, it hid whoever was studying me. The gun fired. I started running, and almost immediately, I knew the watcher was there. The city roared with spectators, but at mile 2, something cut straight through the noise, something familiar. A gray, smooth stone, sitting perfectly centered on the yellow line of the street, untouched by the thousands of runners passing it. Everyone avoided it without noticing. But I saw it. My pulse spiked. Someone had gotten onto the course early. Someone had placed it exactly where I would see it, exactly where I would run. My pace faltered for a moment, and in that brief hesitation, I felt watched. Not from the sidelines, not from the rooftops, from somewhere, impossibly close. I pushed forward, forced myself to focus. But every time I passed a mile marker, I scanned the ground. Mile 5 empty. Mile 6 crowds cheering. Mile 7, a laminated 3x5 card taped to a garbage can on the left side of the course. I didn't want to look. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The message was short. Good pace so far. Don't fade. My chest tightened. The crowd around me suddenly felt like a living wall closing in. Thousands of strangers, all clapping, shouting, waving signs, and yet I felt singled out, isolated inside the noise. I ran faster, trying to escape the invisible presence. There was no logic to it, but logic had stopped helping me weeks ago. At mile 13, runners usually feel a mix of dread and adrenaline. But when I crossed the half-marathon line, something cut through the cheering. A low, steady whisper behind me. Not a voice, not a word. A pace. A sound perfectly matching the rhythm of my footfalls, mimicking every breath. I whipped my head around. A man was behind me, tall, lean, wearing a plain black running shirt and a blank white hat. No bib number, no timing tag, no hydration belt, no phone, no earbuds. But he was keeping my exact speed, every stride a mirror. As soon as I made eye contact, he drifted into the crowd and disappeared. Not slowed, not sped up, just vanished. I nearly stopped running right there, but the momentum of the herd pushed me forward. My legs felt numb, my mind buzzed. The anonymous man wasn't proof he could have been anyone, but my gut told me otherwise. Someone had joined the race just long enough for me to see him. Someone wanted me to know I wasn't alone. The next 6 miles were a blur. I don't remember the streets, or the spectators, or the music blasting from DJs on the corners. I only remember scanning the ground, and the rooftops, and the faces of runners brushing past me. At mile 18, I found the next sign. Not a card, not a stone. A chalk spiral drawn directly across the pavement, wide at the edges, tightening inward, ending in a sharp point. Every runner stepped over it without noticing. But I knew that symbol. It was the exact pattern the stones formed on the morning I found, 3 of them placed along my route. My rhythm spiral, as I'd come to think of it, mapping the weakness of my training. This wasn't just tracking anymore. It was communication. A map, a warning, or an instruction. I didn't know which. All I knew was that I needed to finish this race, or escape it. The wind was brutal at mile 21, pushing runners back as if the city itself wanted to stop us. My legs burned. My lungs felt like fire. But something blew across the course, something small and white, and stuck briefly to my leg before skittering away. A laminated card. I stopped, stumbling to grab it before another runner crushed it. The message: your left knee is tracking outward. Correct it. Don't embarrass yourself now. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped it. They weren't just watching the race. They were watching me, in real time, with enough precision to analyze my biomechanics. I crushed the card and threw it away, but the words burned into my skull. Correct it. The final stretch of the Chicago Marathon is brutal wind tunnels, fatigue, dehydration, but for me, it was something worse. I kept seeing the same figure. Black shirt, white hat. Sometimes he was a few steps ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes on the sidewalk, blending into the cheering crowd, but never for more than a second. Every time I tried to focus on his face, he melted into the motion of the race. At one point, I swear I saw him perched on the edge of a parking structure, watching the runners pass below. And when I blinked, he was gone. My body was failing, my vision blurred, but at mile 25, 1 mile from the finish line, the crowd suddenly parted for a moment, and there on the pavement, placed carefully between 2 yellow lines, a single, smooth, gray stone. Perfect. Clean. Centered. Waiting for me. I staggered to a halt. Someone behind me crashed into my back, swore at me, kept running. But time felt frozen, because next to the stone was a folded card. Not laminated. Paper. Handwritten. I knelt, legs trembling, and picked it up. My name was on the front. Inside, in that same elegant handwriting: you're almost there. Finish strong. I'll be right behind you. My breath caught in my throat. Right behind me. I turned. The crowd roared. Runners streamed past. Hundreds of faces, thousands of eyes. And one tall figure in a black shirt and white hat ducked behind a spectator and disappeared. I ran. I don't remember crossing the final mile. I don't remember the noise, or the announcer, or the volunteers handing out medals. All I remember is collapsing after the finish line, gasping, scanning the crowd with wild, panicked eyes. He wasn't there. Or maybe he was everywhere. I don't know. The official photos captured thousands of runners. None matched the man I saw. No one in a black shirt. No one in a white hat. No one without a bib. But I know what I saw. I know he was there. And I know he followed me. We moved. Sarah insisted. New apartment. Different neighborhood. Different schedule. I stopped running outside. I stopped using Strava. Stopped wearing a GPS watch. But some mornings, before sunrise, I'll step into the kitchen and glance outside. And there, on the patio table, I'll see a small gray stone. Perfectly smooth, perfectly centered. No note, no critique, just a reminder, a quiet message. I still know your pace. After the running incident, I developed a debilitating anxiety about solitary activities. The gym became my least favorite place, but I needed to maintain some semblance of a fitness routine. I shifted my focus entirely from cardio to weightlifting, figuring it was a less time-intensive, less vulnerable activity. Plus, the community weight room in my apartment complex's basement was usually empty. It was a windowless, cavernous room that smelled perpetually of rubber mats and stale air. There was an old, scratched mirror running the length of the far wall, intended for checking form, but it mostly just reflected the flickering fluorescent lights and the general gloom of the basement. I was working through a new deadlift routine, focusing on form and steady progression. I had been at it for 3 weeks, meticulously tracking my reps and weight in a small black notebook I kept in my gym bag. I'm a creature of routine, and in this isolated environment, I was even more obsessive about it. The first hint that my isolation wasn't real came on a Thursday. I was struggling through my final set of 5 reps. The weight was heavy, and my form was starting to break down. I managed to lock out the 5th rep, dropped the bar with a clatter, and bent over, hands on my knees, sucking wind. When I straightened up, I glanced at the mirror, checking the redness in my face. That's when I saw it. Right in the lower left corner of the mirror, in the foggy condensation near the baseboard, was a single, small fingerprint. It wasn't a smudge. It was a clear, perfect print, as if someone had pressed their thumb there and then slowly dragged it downward, leaving a tiny, perfect tail. I walked over to it. The weight room had been utterly empty when I came in, and I hadn't touched that corner. It was too low for a casual touch, too isolated for a stray brush. I wiped it off with the edge of my sweaty t-shirt, telling myself it was a remnant from a previous user, maybe a maintenance guy, or just my imagination running wild after the running stalker incident. I packed my bag and left, feeling a prickle of unease that I blamed on my history of paranoia. The next day, I was back, same time, 7 p.m. I did my warm-ups, and when I looked at the mirror, I nearly dropped the barbell. The fingerprint was back, not in the exact same spot, but nearby, about a foot to the right. Same size, same downward drag, same unnatural clarity in the condensation. This time, the fingerprint was positioned exactly over my reflection. When I looked into the mirror, the print was centered on my own chest. It felt like a deliberate mark, a focus point. The feeling of being watched, that cold certainty from the running trail, flooded back. But this time, it felt closer, more intimate. Someone had been in this small windowless room, silent and hidden, while I was straining, grunting, and vulnerable. And they had left a mark. I wiped the print away, but the damage was done. My focus was shattered. I spent the rest of my workout obsessively scanning the room, the single entrance, the small storage closet, the dark corners by the unused machines. Every squeak of the air conditioning unit sounded like a footstep. I tried to put the incident out of my mind, resorting to the mantra, "It's a basement. People leave things." But the pattern continued. Over the next 3 sessions, a single fingerprint would appear on the mirror, always positioned deliberately. Once it was over my right knee, the moment I was struggling with my squat depth. Another time, it was positioned exactly on my reflection's lower back, right where I always felt the tension during a heavy lift. Then the notes started. They weren't on laminated cards or taped to machines. They were written on the mirror itself. I was in the middle of a heavy bench press set, completely focused on driving the weight up. I completed the set, racked the bar, and sat up, breathing heavily. When I looked up at my reflection, I saw it written just above my head in the reflection, in the same foggy condensation, were 3 words: elbows in, lower. The lettering was small, neat, and written with the absolute authority of a coach. The horror wasn't in the intrusion, it was in the accuracy. My elbows were flaring out, and I wasn't hitting parallel depth. The person who wrote this had been watching my form with an almost professional level of detail. I jumped up, sprinting to the entrance, throwing the door open. The hallway was empty. The stairs were silent. I rushed back in, my mind racing. How? The weight room was self-contained. The air conditioning was loud. Where could someone have hidden for 20 minutes, watching me struggle, and then managed to write a message on the mirror while my back was turned? I wiped the words away, my hands shaking. The feeling of being spotted, of having an unseen, demanding presence in the room was overwhelming. I felt like an actor on a stage, lit only by the horrible fluorescent lights, performing for an audience I couldn't see. The next time, the note was longer. I was warming up for my deadlifts, studying my small black notebook to confirm my intended weight progression. When I looked up, the note was there, written across the center of the mirror. You should be doing 3 sets of 3 at 315 pounds today, not 5x5 at 275 pounds. You are undershooting your potential. Stop consulting the notebook. The goal is progression, not comfort. I staggered back. My notebook, which contained the exact details of my planned routine, 315 pounds for 3x3, was in my gym bag, zipped shut, on the floor next to me. Someone had been in my bag. The weight room wasn't just being observed, it was being violated. They weren't just watching me, they were reading my private notes, knowing my schedule, and, more disturbingly, demanding I follow their schedule. The psychological shift was profound. My fear of being watched on the trail was replaced by a deeper, more manipulative terror. The fear of being controlled. The unseen figure had appointed themselves my personal trainer, judge, and jury. I was now performing under duress. I went home and told Sarah. She was hysterical. "We have to move. Ben, this is worse than the running. They've been in your things. They're inside the building." I, however, had crossed a line from fear into a kind of horrified, morbid fascination. "No, Sarah. I need to understand this. They're telling me to progress. They're telling me I'm strong. They're trying to push me. I have to see how far this goes." It was a terrible, prideful, and utterly human reaction. I was a man challenged in my personal domain, and I felt compelled to meet the challenge. I went back to the weight room the next day, determined to change my pattern, but I couldn't bring myself to. The coach knew what I needed to do, and I felt an inexplicable, terrifying obligation to follow the script. I walked over to the rack. The bar was loaded. 315 pounds, exactly the weight the note had demanded. I looked at the mirror. No new message, just the dark, reflective glass. I was alone. I chalked up, approached the bar, and started my set. The weight felt heavy, but I was motivated by a cold, desperate terror. I completed the first rep, then the second. On the third rep, I felt a tremor in my lower back, a sharp, searing pain that made my vision swim. I wasn't just struggling, I was failing. The weight was too heavy for my body that day. I tried to drop the bar, but my hands were locked onto the knurling. I was pinned, the bar halfway up my shins, my back bowing into a terrible, dangerous curve. And that's when the message appeared. It wasn't written in condensation this time. It appeared on the mirror, right above my contorted, reflected face, in a viscous, dark, red liquid that dripped slowly down the glass. The words were bold, thick, and unforgiving. "Lock it out. Do not fail." The sight of the dripping red text, which looked exactly like blood, snapped something inside me. It wasn't just a challenge anymore. It was a threat of physical violence, a visual representation of the injury I was about to inflict on myself. I roared, a pure, desperate sound of panic, and with a final, reckless surge of adrenaline, I heaved the bar up, slamming it onto the floor with a deafening crash. I stood there, gasping, my back on fire, staring at the mirror. The red words were slowly running down the glass, pooling at the base. The door to the storage closet, which I had checked and found locked when I came in, was now standing slightly ajar. I didn't think. I ran to the closet, threw the door open, and looked inside. It was a small, cramped space, full of old buckets and broken mop heads. Nothing that could conceal a person. But on the floor, next to a dusty container of chlorine, was a single item. My small, black, zipped notebook. It was open to the page where I had written my planned routine. On that page, written in the same neat, terrifying script as the mirror notes, were 2 new lines, scrawled in black marker. "You finished. Good. Now, what's your next progression? You should know better than to leave this where I can reach it." I dropped the notebook and ran out of the weight room, not stopping until I was back in my apartment, hyperventilating. The logical conclusion was inescapable. The spotter hadn't been in the storage closet. They had been in the room, watching me, waiting for the moment of my greatest failure to deliver the note. And the red writing on the mirror? Maybe it was paint, maybe food coloring, maybe a sick joke, but the timing was the terror. I didn't go to the gym again. My terror was complete. I knew I had an invisible, persistent, and highly dedicated coach who was willing to push me to the point of injury, not for my benefit, but for the satisfaction of seeing their subject perform. I moved out of the apartment complex a month later. I still get phantom pains in my back, and every time I look in a mirror, especially in an empty room, I can't help but look for the condensation, waiting for the next coaching instruction, the next demand for progression from the invisible spotter. That feeling of being graded on your private struggle is the most frightening thing I have ever known. This last story is the one that still gives me nightmares, primarily because it combines the two previous fears, the meticulous tracking and the invasive control, but applies it to a setting that should have been the safest, an empty field under the open sky. After the weight room incident, I gave up entirely on organized fitness. My only remaining sport was an old habit from college, kicking a football. It was a solitary, therapeutic activity. I was a terrible quarterback, but for some reason, I had a decent, powerful leg. I'd drive out to a massive, underused park on the edge of the city, find a quiet practice field, and spend an hour just punting the ball as high and far as I could, chasing it down and punting it back. It was repetitive, simple, and beautifully empty. The field was tucked away behind an old, disused baseball diamond. It had tall, overgrown grass and only one recognizable feature, a solitary white metal goalpost, leaning slightly to the left, standing like a forgotten monument at the far end of the field. I started going there every Sunday morning at 6:30 a.m. I was alone. Always. The park was too remote for dog walkers, too unkempt for serious athletes. It was my space. The first unusual event was minor, almost forgettable. I had just finished my session and was walking back toward my car. The ball I used was an old, slightly deflated Wilson, and I had written my initials, J.A., on it with a thick, black Sharpie. As I was wiping the mud off the ball before putting it in my trunk, I noticed something new written below my initials. It was a single number, 71. I stared at it. It wasn't my handwriting. The number was written with the same type of thick, black Sharpie, pressed firmly into the leather. It looked like a yardage marker. I couldn't figure it out. Had I punted a ball exactly 71 yards? Maybe. It was possible on a good kick. I figured maybe some kids had found the ball after I left the previous week and were messing with it. I tried to rub the number off, but the Sharpie was permanent. The next Sunday, I was back. I hit a dozen solid punts, each one a massive arc into the gray morning sky. I felt free. I had broken the patterns of the trail and the gym. Here, there was no routine to track, no mirror to write on. When I retrieved the ball for the final time, I checked the spot below my initials. The number 71 was still there, but now, a new one had been added right below it. 74. A cold knot formed in my stomach. The addition wasn't a coincidence. This was scoring. Someone wasn't just observing me. They were measuring my performance in real time, assigning a metric to my most solitary, meaningless exercise. My best, most satisfying punt that morning was the one I knew I had hit perfectly. It was the one I had estimated went around 75 yards. The number 74 felt like an objective, slightly disappointing correction of my own self-estimation. I spent the rest of the day in a rising state of panic. I hadn't seen a single person, car, or shadow near the field. The only possible vantage point was a small, wooded hill a quarter-mile away, too far to accurately measure a football punt, even with a rangefinder. I had tried to escape the surveillance by choosing the most random, isolated activity, and I had simply provided my watcher with a new dataset to analyze. I decided to try and break the tracking through inconsistency. The following Sunday, I went at 11 a.m. instead of 6:30 a.m. The weather was bright and sunny. I felt exposed, but I figured I'd only be there for 20 minutes. I walked onto the field. My football was still in my trunk. I pulled it out and looked at the scoring space. There was a new entry, and it wasn't a number. It was a letter grade. C. It was written in the same thick black Sharpie. The implied criticism was infuriating. I had gone from being precisely measured to being harshly judged. I immediately looked around. The entire park seemed deserted. I scanned the tree line, the hill, the distant baseball diamond. Nothing moved. The only sound was the faint hum of traffic from the highway half a mile away. I started kicking. My concentration was shot. My form was erratic, my punts short and wobbly. The grade had gotten into my head. I was performing for the anonymous critic, and I was failing miserably. I chased down one particularly bad kick. As I bent to pick up the ball, I saw a small, plastic yard marker, the kind used by a surveying company, pushed into the ground next to the ball. It was one of those orange flags on a thin wire. Taped to the flag, in that familiar, neat, clinical script, was a note. You've lost 6 yards of distance and 0.4 seconds of hang time since last week. Your drop technique is too high. You are reacting to the score instead of improving it. I expected better consistency. My heart hammered against my ribs. Hang time. This person wasn't using a simple laser rangefinder. They were timing the flight of the ball. This was a dedicated, professional level of analysis. And they were right. I had let the C rattle me. The terror here wasn't just the invasion of privacy. It was the realization that this person was not only highly skilled, but seemed to genuinely believe they were helping me. They were the ultimate, cold-blooded coach. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were trying to perfect me. I went back one last time, driven by a desperate, fatalistic need to confront or defeat the observer. I knew I couldn't beat them, so I had to try and force their hand. I loaded my car with 5 footballs, not just one. I started kicking them, one after another, in rapid succession, kicking each one in a different direction, some high and short, some low and long, some hooking far to the left, others slicing to the right. I was trying to create chaos, to overload their system, to make my data impossible to track. I was sprinting from one ball to the next, panting, sweating, fueled by pure adrenaline. I was kicking wildly, desperately. After about 10 minutes of this frenetic, random activity, I stopped, completely exhausted, and leaned against the solitary goalpost. I looked down at the original ball, the one with my initials and the scores. There was no new number. There was no new grade. There was a new, meticulously drawn symbol. It was a perfect, small crosshair, drawn right over my initials, J.A. Below the crosshair, a new note, written in the Sharpie, but more deliberate, larger. Stop wasting time. You've been given a goal. Go kick it. The goalpost. The one recognizable feature on the field. The only thing they hadn't yet incorporated into the grading system. I felt a wave of icy panic wash over me. The crosshair wasn't just a symbol of focus. It was a symbol of being targeted. I walked 30 yards from the goalpost and placed the ball on the ground. My body was shaking, but my mind was utterly clear. I knew what I had to do. I had to kick the field goal. It was the only way to satisfy the observer, to complete the assignment. I focused all my remaining energy on the kick. It was a perfect spiral, a low, powerful trajectory that shot straight toward the leaning white uprights. The ball sailed right through the center. I stood there, panting, waiting for a signal, a noise, an acknowledgement. Nothing. I walked over to the goalpost to retrieve the ball. It was wedged between the crossbar and the slightly bent upright. As I pulled the ball free, I saw one final note, taped high on the crossbar, at least 10 feet in the air. This note was printed on the same laminated cardstock from the running trail. I ripped it down and read it. Excellent accuracy. You finally followed the directive. Now, turn around. I dropped the ball and slowly turned around, facing the empty field. I looked out across the overgrown grass, past the spot where I had just kicked the ball, all the way to the distant, small, wooded hill. And there, standing perfectly still, right at the crest of the hill, where they had the perfect, unobstructed view of the entire field, too far away to make out features, but clearly visible against the gray sky, was a figure. Tall, unmoving, and dressed in all black, holding something long and thin that glinted in the morning sunday. A telescope? A camera? A high-powered rangefinder? They didn't move. They didn't wave. They simply stood there, a silhouette of dedicated observation. I held their gaze for what felt like an eternity. The figure slowly, deliberately, raised their hand and gave a single, firm thumbs up. The simple, professional gesture of approval was the most terrifying thing of all. It wasn't a monster. It was a coach. It wasn't a random stalker. It was a person who had spent months mastering my routines, invading my private life, and demanding my perfection. I didn't run. I simply walked, slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact with the figure on the hill until I reached my car. I never went back to that park. I don't run, I don't lift, and I definitely don't kick a football anymore. But the psychological horror remains. I still feel the urge to perform, to improve, to check my form, because I know that somewhere out there is a patient, meticulous, and terrifyingly dedicated coach who is waiting for me to choose my next sport, so they can chart my progress and demand my perfection. And I'm still afraid that one day I'll succumb to the pressure and step back onto a field, just to earn that final, terrifying thumbs up.